Welcome back to The Hunt, where we talk about the biggest scams in the world and explain them to some of our favorite people. Today, we're talking about three companies with three addresses across three countries that on paper bring in tens of billions of dollars in revenue between them. We went to one of the headquarters in Minnesota, locked door, empty reception, mail piled by the entrance, no phone number, no website. In Ireland, a security guard walked our reporter through an Optum building to a room with an MSR logo, about 10 cubicles, and nobody was there either. And then in Switzerland, as we tried to figure out what was going on, the company called the police on our reporter. None of the three companies replied to repeated outreach. One even sued to stop public records we were asking for from being released. But we still got the documents. And now, after a year of reporting, we're ready to tell you what we found about these companies, which sit right in the middle of what you pay for prescription drugs. Because of them, you end up having to pay higher premiums, higher copays, and sometimes you don't get the medicine you need. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Mark Cuban. Mark is an expert in this space. He's a vocal opponent of pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, and he's built a business, Cost Plus Drugs, trying to help patients root around them and get cheaper medicine. I'm going to walk him through what we found step by step and have him explain why this matters to your life and your wallet and your healthcare. And we'll also be joined by Laura Wadston, one of the lead reporters on this article and an expert on the healthcare system, as well as Caroline Calloway, who at the end of this episode will explain the scam back to us. So to set the table, here's the everyday experience. Your doctor prescribes a drug, you go to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist tells you it's covered by insurance or it's not. It's $30 or it's suddenly $500, or you need prior authorization, or you have to try a different drug first. Most people assume that decision's made by their doctor or their insurer, but it's actually made by a middleman, a PBM. Mark, can you explain in plain English what is a PBM and what do PBMs do?
So PBMs really were originally designed to aggregate demand and negotiate with pharmaceutical companies to get better prices for employers and for patients. They've evolved to be something far different. What they've evolved to be is an aggregator of demand who auctions off access to that demand. So rather than trying to negotiate the lowest price for patients, they auction off access to what's called a formulary that enables patients to use their insurance to pay for those medications. So for instance, if you run a company like I do and I have X number of employees, then we would hypothetically use a PBM to say, okay, for our employees, go negotiate or aggregate the demand you already have for all these employees from across all these employers and members that you have, and get us a good price. But instead of that, they're auctioning off access to say to the manufacturers, the brand manufacturers, if you don't pay me, I'm not going to include you in this formulary. And if I don't include you in this formulary, your brand will not have access to insurance for our members, in which case you won't make as much money. And what's happened is you've seen big PBMs auction off access to formularies and exclude a GLP-1 like Lilly's GLP-1s. You've seen other companies just be on the outside looking in of formularies and not be able to sell their product at all. And so that the ability to auction off access to the formulary is very, very powerful, and big brand medications can't live without access to formularies.
Right. I like to think of it kind of like the PBMs are a bouncer at a club, and they're saying, if you don't grease me, if you don't pay up, then
they control the velvet rope. They control the velvet rope. Yep.
And then, what's supposed to happen is they are negotiating with these drug companies, and they're negotiating rebates to make drugs cheaper for you. The rebates are supposed to go to the patients and the plans. And in fact, PBMs skim off the top. And over time, employers and plans realized this. And they said, all right, if you're negotiating rebates, we want 100% of that money passed through to us, which on paper threatened the PBM's profit engine. So then how did they respond to this scrutiny?
So they responded by doing two things. One, they created these intermediary subsidiaries called rebate GPOs.
Real quick, Hunterbrook calls these entities PBM GPOs, but rebate GPO is a synonym. They're also sometimes called rebate aggregators. See what I mean about these things being confusing? All right, back to Mark.
And what the rebate GPO was, the biggest three PBMs are owned by the biggest three insurance companies. And so these are $100 billion plus companies. But they decided that they needed to create these subsidiaries called rebate GPOs and put several of them outside the United States for tax reasons so that they could negotiate the rebates with the brand pharmaceutical companies and then be able to then charge their parent company, the PBM, the big three PBM, they'll charge them a fee for doing the negotiation, which in turn allows them to tell the employer, hey, we're passing on all of the rebates that we get without communicating the fact that their subsidiary is retaining a bunch of money as a fee, an intercompany fee, for doing the rebate negotiation. Even though you would think a multi-$100 billion company would be able to do that without creating a subsidiary.
They're not passing it on because they have these rebate GPO subsidiaries outside the US that sort of like hide the money that they're keeping.
Yes, and that is the crux of our investigation, which we're about to get to in a second. So that's the exact right question. Laura, do you want to just start by explaining the big three PBMs and how much of the market they control with your experience reporting on antitrust?
Yeah, so thanks. My background was looking at antitrust specifically in healthcare. Under the Biden administration, Lena Khan, leadership at the FTC, the big three PBMs and their market power was definitely a big priority. Their investigation is still currently ongoing. We're checking in with them on the status of that. And the lawsuit, their case, FTC administrative case against the big three is also ongoing, but it's been delayed so much by the government shutdown and by the firing of the FTC commissioners. It's been a focus of the FTC. I think it likely will, but the stat that's often thrown around, Mark, and I'm sure you've heard this, and I've said this many times, is that the big three control 80% of the market. Something that our reporting found, though, and this came up from several different sources, is that through these PBM GPOs, they actually are involved with even more than 80%. 95%. 95%, because if you are not one of the big three and don't have the volume to negotiate with the brand manufacturers, you have to in turn buy from Ascent, which is the only one of the big three that will sell to pharmacies that want to get access to rebates. And so that's a two-part whammy, because the other two that don't have an Ascent, whose GPOs don't sell to third-party pharmacies, they do it to kind of make sure that there's no competition between them. So for like cost plus drugs, right, we would love to carry every single brand medication available. The big brand manufacturers say, we can't sell to you cost plus drugs. So we don't have a lot of Eliquis, a lot of basic brand name medications, because they've been told if they do sell to us, they'll be diminished on their formularies. And so Ascent, one of the rebate GPOs, has said, you know what, we're going to go into the business of working with companies like Cost Plus Drugs and transparent PBMs, where we'll pass through a portion of the rebates. But only one of the big PBMs has allowed that to happen, right, via their rebate GPO Ascent. And because there's only one, there's no competition for Cost Plus Drugs to say, okay, MSR, or I forget the name of
Zinc.
MSR Zinc, why can't we buy from you? And they're saying, no, you can't buy from us. So effectively being in collusion by not going into a very active market, they keep the pricing structure the way it is. And as a result, 95 to 96% of rebates are negotiated by those three companies.
Exactly. And so our investigation starts there. which is we know that there's these PBMs that control almost the entire market. And we know that they eventually promised to pass through 100% of the rebates they negotiated to patients. But they set up these three subsidiaries, Zinc, Ascent, and MSR. And those three subsidiaries, including two that are offshore, are still collecting fees. They're the new bouncers, and they're still collecting fees from pharma in order for you to be covered. And our question was, all right, what are these companies actually doing? Because the remarkable thing is that Zinc and MSR and Ascent bring in billions of dollars a year, the subsidiaries. And our question was, what are they doing? What are they being paid for? Because it used to be that the rebate alone covered the cost of drugs. Mark, what's your guess as to what they're doing at these offices most of the time?
Nothing.
How confident are you in the fact that they're doing nothing?
100%. Because there's maybe Ascent, because they sell to third parties, has some people that do some things, right? But beyond that, there's nothing for them to do but paperwork. That's it.
So Mark, so you're telling me that these companies make $10 billion a year for doing nothing?
At least.
Okay.
At least.
So we wanted to see if that was true, because people like Mark, who are in fairness, in some ways biased, they're competitors to the PBMs. They say things like these three organizations don't do anything. And the first thing we decided to do, because nobody had done this before, was actually just go to their listed headquarters.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mark, what if I told you that we went in Bloomington, Minnesota to the headquarters of Zinc, subsidiary of CVS, makes billions of dollars a year. We went there on one weekday, looked inside. Guess how many people were working there?
One.
Zero people.
Oh, zero people. I thought there would be a security guard, right? To at least pretend.
There's a security guard downstairs, a door person. But we actually sent the pop rock star Rafaela, who happens to live in Minnesota. So she lived nearby, and she was able to get past the doorman. And she went up and she rang, and there was no one there. And she filmed it, and we'll show the video when we post the podcast.
That's awesome.
But there was no one there. And then we said, all right, maybe they just work from home. So we went another day. And there was nobody there. Nobody at the Zinc office. We then spoke
to Could you see inside, or there's just a door there?
Yeah, the door's glass. So there's nobody.
There was confirmed nobody in there.
Yeah, front desk with the logo. She rang the doorbell, knocked, around the hallway.
Just one desk. You could see one desk, and that was it. Could you tell it was a small office? Was it an obviously small office?
It was it's a suite within a big office park. And so it was
suite. Okay.
Yeah, like a front desk area. And then you could see there was a hallway with some other rooms
some cubicle
behind
or
it.
Office. Okay, got it.
Yeah, certainly not large.
No one there. And then the next day we went, and there was more mail and still nobody inside.
And there was more mail that was there and nobody inside. That's kind of a giveaway, isn't it?
Yeah. So nobody really collected it.
That's awesome.
And then we went to Dublin. So you read the New York Times article on PBM GPOs, and they show MSR as this big glass building in Dublin. And so we sent a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. He went inside, went past the parent company's office, and went in during a weekday to MSR. And guess how many employees were there, Mark?
Same. Maybe one?
Still zero employees.
There were zero.
There were zero.
Still haven't hired anybody. Yeah.
Zero employees there. And then we went to Switzerland. And it's funny what you say about Ascent being real, because we went to Schaffhausen, Switzerland, and Ascent did have a real office several floors up in this building, in this tax haven in Switzerland, Schaffhausen. Yep. And they did have 5 people working in there. There were 5 people in the Ascent office.
Hey, that reduces the unemployment rate, and so that's a good thing for Switzerland.
Yes. And then the funniest part was our reporter waited outside and just observed, trying to figure out what was going on. And suddenly the police were called on him. So two police walk over, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And in fairness, this came not too many months after the Luigi Mangione shooting of the healthcare
right,
CEO.
So they need to pay attention. Right.
So perhaps they were confused why someone was in town.
Right.
But the funny thing was, a reporter told them that they were there investigating this company. And the police said, "Oh, we cannot believe the American healthcare system."
Yeah, they're not alone. They're not alone.
They said the American healthcare system sounds awful, and we understand why you're investigating here. And there's
But
plenty
please
of
carry
companies
on.
in Schaffhausen. Exactly. And they were like, there's plenty of companies in Schaffhausen that are just here for tax reasons. And eventually the Ascent executives come down. They refuse to share their names. They refuse to answer any questions. And they asked the reporter not to come back. Mark, I guess I'm just curious, high level, what's updated about your priors, or what's your take on the fact that these are mostly shells?
So it's really interesting because yesterday I was at an event at Johns Hopkins, and I was in a conversation with Dr. Patrick Conroy, who happens to be the CEO of OptumRx, who told me, now this was yesterday versus several months ago when you went, that they no longer use that rebate GPO to retain anything at all. Now I called out BS because I saw a couple paragraphs from one of their contracts where now instead of using rebates as their source of revenue, they use more fees. And they explicitly say in their contract that they will charge fees equal to 5.45% of what's equivalent of the list price, what's known as WAC, and other fees that they may from time to time charge. And then they'll charge you fees for putting together the IT required to track those fees. So they, left pocket, right pocket, what was once probably called just rebates, now they're charging as fees that may not be a percentage of the drug list price, but they're getting their money one way or the other with no people involved. It's just fees. It's just a different name for the same thing.
What we ended up doing was we realized that these companies were charging these billions and billions of dollars a year in fees that probably once would have been paid to them as rebates. And then once they said that they would pass through 100% of the rebates, they start charging more in fees.
And let's just say what this is, right? Let's just say what this is. This is money paid by sick patients or their employers that is then retained by the PBM, with some potentially less and less, some being passed through to the employer. But in all cases, the money is generated and created by sick employees.
Yes.
And the sick part of this being sick employees is that where employers recognize that they're getting rebates, right, that are being passed through. When they recognize that that money is coming from their sickest employees with the most chronic or devastating illnesses, they start to reconsider. Most of them. Not all of them.
How could they not?
Most of them. Right, because they just don't understand it. The information asymmetry between what the insurance companies and their captive PBMs and pharmacies know versus what the employers know is insane. You would think if you're an employer with thousands of employees or members that you're covering, you would have access to all your claims. So you could see, are people adhering to medicine that are associated with these rebates? They don't even get their claims. When I go into these CEOs or HR people and I say, first thing you need to do is ask for all of your claims. Because I already know what the response is going to be. Those PBMs say no. They tell them, we'll give you some portion of your claims, and then we can audit those with one of our affiliated or associated companies, and then we'll tell you if there are any issues.
This is like highway robbery in broad daylight.
You're exactly right, Caroline, because that's what crooks do, right? They find out who the mark is, which is in this case the employer and their members, and then they rig the game by making sure that there's an information asymmetry by saying, I'm going to pretend to give you enough money, enough information, but I'm not actually going to give you enough information. And that information that I give you, I'm going to pretend to allow you to audit it to prove that we're not crooks, but we're only going to allow you to audit it if you use one of our affiliated companies that's designed to protect us from looking like crooks. And so when I go to these organizations of HR managers and I say, how many of you have had a real audit, meaning all of your claims, not many show their hands. But the ones that do, I always say, how many of you were paid too much? Nobody's ever raised their hand. How many of you were underpaid? 10% hands go up, 20% hands stay up, 30%, 40%. That's how bad it is. That's how much of a scam all this is. And they're trying to evolve it because of all the peer pressure and government and legislative pressure and customer pressure. They're trying to evolve it to fees. So that because if it's a fee, it's just, we can make up something that we're charging you for.
A data fee, a portal fee, whatever the
processing
new label
fee.
is.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right, a negotiation fee, because we negotiated these rebates. Even though we're passing through, we're keeping 10% as a rebate negotiation fee.
And here's the thing that's so amazing. Okay, so we calculated the numbers. And we scraped LinkedIn and job boards. And then what we ended up finding was across all three, and almost all of them were at Ascent, they were at maximum like 150 employees, okay? So tens of billions in revenue, 150 employees.
And I'll give them 150 employees. Okay, that's legit in many ways.
That was a generous analysis because, we're trying to be as credible as we can with our estimate.
And in that same vein, Laura, Cost Plus, we've talked to people at Ascent. I've talked to people that supposedly they do work for the PBM and are representing Ascent, right? And negotiating for Ascent, because as I say, they are the one rebate GPO that actually will work with third parties.
Exactly. And Mark, what we found is even if you give them 150 employees generously, that means that they are making somewhere around $50 million per employee. For context, per employee. For context,
Laura,
Mark,
I wish you had gotten that job. Honestly, you missed out.
Really?
I'm so sorry.
I know, yeah.
Really?
So Mark, I'm just curious, back of envelope, how much do you think that NVIDIA makes per employee?
Isn't it like 120 million? No, it's less than that. It's like $18 million per employee or something like that.
I think 3.6.
Damn. Okay.
Guys, I gotta go apply to a job at NVIDIA. This has been
No
great.
kidding,
but
right?
I have a new gig.
Tell
I gotta
Jensen
pursue.
I said hi.
Yeah, well, to be clear, it's not that NVIDIA is paying these employees this. That's how much money NVIDIA is making per employee that they have.
Right.
Like $3 million.
Right.
And to be clear, many of those employees who have worked there for more than 3, 4, 5 years are worth a whole lot
Of
more
course,
money than
yes.
that. So give them credit, right?
Yes, if they were paid in stock, the average NVIDIA employee has much more than that. But either way, there's two possibilities here. Either Zinc and MSR and Ascent are the most productive companies in the history of humanity. They have this few employees and they're making this much money. Or they're not really doing the services that they're being paid for. And actually, that's the money that was supposed to be paid to United Healthcare and to Cigna and to CVS. And our reporting indicates that that's the case. And then we actually went and spoke to some of the people involved in this. And Laura, do you want to talk through some of what the people who helped?
I'm loving this, by the way. I'm loving this.
these
This is
GPOs
great.
said? Yeah, we're glad to be able to tell you about this. Laura, what did some of the people who helped build this tell us was the purpose of these entities?
Yeah. So first, going to just set the scene a little bit for you. This is, roughly, in 2019, during Donald Trump's first term, he directed HHS. I'm sure, Mark, if you remember this, when he tried to get rid of the safe harbor provision, protecting rebates. And basically that means that there was a policy that pharmaceutical rebates would not be considered kickbacks because they were supposed to overall help lower the cost of drugs. Trump, because people, as people were finding out these rebates were being abused, catching on to the scheme, Trump was like, let's get rid of these rebates. PBMs, PBMs are on edge because their life force, the stream of revenue that they're relying on is on the chopping block. We talked to some of the people who were responsible for handling that threat, and their solution, one of the most striking things was how consistently the different insiders, people at all the different 3 places and from pharma described this function of these PBM GPOs, as we call them. A former Optum executive who helped create MSR told regulators and then press that the explicit purpose was to create a category of the manufacturer payments, money that pharmaceutical manufacturers pay, that would not need to be passed through to their health plan clients. And he said almost verbatim, the intention of the GPO is to create a fee structure that can be retained and not passed on to the client. Another executive, Steve Miller, who helped create Ascent while he worked for Express Scripts, told us that PBM GPOs allow the companies to, quote, double or triple dip on fees. He explained it very plainly. There's rebates, and then there are data fees, administrative fees, clinical fees, and those fees all fall into different buckets that, depending on the wording on the contract and most of the current health plan contracts, because as we spoke to people, we spoke to James Gelfond, who represents the largest employers in the country through the ERISA Industry Committee, and he said his members don't have much leverage to negotiate with the PBMs on their contract terms. So if these things your contract says they pass through all of the rebates, all of those fees aren't likely being captured.
Not at all. And it says in the contract that they can capture, like I said earlier, they're allowed to capture the fees, and they're not going to share them with the employers or states or whatever it may be.
Exactly. So part of what was striking to us is that this was just sort of very plainly described by the people who created this.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, why would they say that?
Their take is essentially, well, I think to be fair to them, what they think is pharma has given us a really bad rap. And pharma wants to charge a ton of money, and we exist in the middle, and we're supposed to negotiate on behalf of plans and bring down prices. And if it weren't for us, that wouldn't happen. And sure, we started getting some political backlash because of pharma. And so we couldn't just capture money from rebates. That wasn't working anymore. That wasn't sustainable. And so we found a new way to deal with this. And I think they were very pragmatic. And they were like, we could do fees and we're still going to pass through rebates. And then they wrote their contracts in such a way that they hoped people wouldn't notice that there was this other pool of capital.
The number one rule of PBM contracts are you can't talk about PBM contracts.
It's Fight Club.
I've been to any number of industry events, and you are not allowed to show anybody else your contract. You're probably not allowed to put it in ChatGPT, because now I recommend to everybody, just put it in ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever, and just say, what are the problems with this contract? But you are not allowed to share any of the information inside of your contract with anybody, or it's a violation of that contract, which is rule number one of a scam. Don't tell anybody.
No one's actually told me what PBM stands for, but I have two suggestions. Pharmaceutical bouncer man, as per what Sammy said, but also pharmaceutical boss of mob. These sound like mob tactics. Don't talk about it. If you won't pay us our little fee, we're going to ice you out. Like, this is like old school mob boss.
Caroline, I gotta say, throughout reporting this story, that came up more interviews than not. This is mafia-like. These are mob tactics. I mean, someone we're going to talk about a little later, who's pretty involved in this space, literally put out a docuseries that United Health Group then used its lawyers to suppress, called Modern Medical Mafia, about these people. Yes. And I guess that's one thing I just wanted to bring
bad mafia. I have so many ideas. What does it stand for? PBM.
Pharmacy Benefit Manager.
Oh, okay.
Benefit Manager. And I just wanted to point out one thing. We were talking about how these companies, right? Like, they basically admitted the game, mask off. Well, that's in our reporting. That's not what they're saying in the public sphere. And they haven't, of course, responded to our requests for comment.
The one big mistake that these companies have made, Caroline, to your point, and to your point, Mark, is that their customers aren't just like normal employers. They also include the government. So they're also ripping off the government and government health plans, right? And so over the course of our reporting, we found something pretty interesting, was that Illinois recovered $45 million from CVS Caremark over the money that they'd routed through Zinc. So we just saw that headline and it raised a lot of questions. We're like, wait a second. Is it the case that the government didn't know that there were all these fees, and that when the government realized, when they tried to be the mob on the government was able to get CVS to pay them $45 million just in Illinois to keep alive their overall scheme? And that was our question. And so we sent FOIA requests to the state of Illinois. And this is where things got really interesting.
Oh my God, what happened?
We asked for these records. And normally when we do a FOIA, sometimes it gets delayed. Sometimes there's administrative bureaucracy. In this case, CVS sued to block the release
Sued
of
you.
these
Sued
documents.
Hunterbrook.
They sued Illinois because
not release it.
to not
got
release
it.
the documents. And eventually, Illinois just released them anyway. They sent to us the partial documents. And what those documents showed was essentially a spreadsheet of payments. And it broke out the payments that were supposed to go pass through as rebates, and then the fees. And we were able to see the fees that they were siphoning off the top and clearly not passing through everything else. And that difference was about the $45 million
Interesting.
that they ended up having to pay back.
I'm going to tell you something that I experienced. So when I talk to a company or a state, I always say, ask for your claims. Or do you get all your claims? And 95% of the time, they don't get all of their claims. So they go to ask. And I talked to one state and they said, we went back to our PBM, Mark, and asked for our claims. And they wouldn't give them to us. This is a state. And I said, okay, that's crazy. Go back and demand your claims and get what you can get. And they finally were able to get them. But when they got the claims, one of the requirements, one of the stipulations was you don't share it with the governor of the state. You can't tell the governor of the state the claims for the constituents of that state because we don't want that governor to know.
Are they allowed to do that? That seems illegal. Surely that's illegal. Surely this can't be.
It's not illegal, but it is very much under the table type approach to business. It is not what a good quality business will do.
And it's definitely the case that if everybody knew the money that PBM GPOs were siphoning off the top, they would not sign those contracts, which is why they were probably willing to pay off.
Oh, of course.
So that they wouldn't have to change their policy. It's a speeding ticket, right, Mark?
Exactly right. I mean, it's negligible. It's immaterial. It's a lot of cases, it's so small, they don't even disclose it to their investors. And they know it's just a price of doing business. Because if you are effectively mispaying your rebates or overcharging fees or inventing new fees or capturing the float between the time you collected the rebate versus when you pay it to the employer or state or wherever it may be, you're making tons of money. And like you said, Sammy, it's a parking ticket. They don't care. And I've said to governors, senators, other Congress people, hey, if there is a PBM or insurance company that's ripped off any state or the federal government / taxpayers more than once, they get one mulligan, but more than once they've ripped them off and been caught. You should make it so they can't do business with the United States of America or your state. And nobody's had the nerve to step up and do that yet. They've all said that's a good idea, but nobody's willing to do it yet.
And the reason they're not doing this ties back to what you guys already said, which is they control almost the entire market.
Yeah, I'm like, Mark, there's going to be nobody who's going to be left. Not,
There's plenty of independent PBMs.
True.
There are plenty of pass-through PBMs. There's a good 30 of them that are decent, right?
It'll be quite a scramble to take all that
That's okay,
data and move it, but
it's even worse and bigger dollars than we've described because the biggest 3 PBMs are owned by the biggest 3 insurance companies. And those insurance companies use the exact same kind of tactics. It's not like the insurance companies are just pure as the driven snow and they just have these PBM subsidiaries that take these liberties every now and then with people's money. No, it is integrated. It is part of the culture of revenue generation of these companies. And I was with, as I said, the head of OptumRx, which is part of United Healthcare, yesterday, and he was spewing the same pablum that, sticking to the company line. And I just literally, I said, I'm going to try not to interrupt, but I don't know if I'll be able to contain myself. And it just claiming bullshit all the time because they just stick to the company line. That's how bad it is. And he knows that the insurance companies, they do the same thing to independent doctors. They game the, locations for site neutrality, all these things that are done that just make healthcare more expensive for all of us.
And, up until this point, we've been mostly talking about, contracts, affiliates, fee categories, a lot of technical stuff. But obviously this actually ultimately just impacts human lives. And so I want to just tell the story briefly. Mark, do you know about the 22-year-old man named Cole Schmidtneck?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Yeah, so Cole had asthma his whole life, and he'd managed it successfully for years with a preventative inhaler and a rescue inhaler, an affordable medication. It had multiple generic versions. And then one day in January of 2024, he goes to a Wisconsin Walgreens to refill the prescription. And he expected to pay what he'd always paid, a copay of $67. But the pharmacist then told him the drug was not covered by insurance. And because of a recent formulary change that his PBM had made, Cole's inhaler now required prior authorization. And so without it, he'd have had to pay $539, which...
He couldn't have even got the actual his one. He could have got a generic, a step therapy requiring prior authorization. So multiple.
Right, exactly. And he didn't have the $539, so he left the pharmacy without his inhaler. And then 5 days later, he suffered an asthma attack, lost consciousness, was rushed to the emergency room, never woke up, died less than a week later. His parents filed a lawsuit against OptumRx, the company whose executive Mark met yesterday. And Optum tried to dismiss the case. A federal judge denied that request. Laura spoke to Bill last month, the father of Cole.
Yeah.
Laura, do you want to just talk a little bit about what you heard from Bill?
Yeah. So Bill was actually, funny enough, when he called me, he was sitting in the rotunda of the Wisconsin Capitol with his life-size printout of Cole. He was advocating for Cole's Act, a PBM reform package in Wisconsin, named in honor of his son, to try to address some of the issues that led to Cole's death. Bill talked about how he's like, I hate politics. I don't want to be in politics. As soon as I get this PBM reform done for my son, I'm out of here. But he has become, Mark, I'm sure as you've seen, Bill is very, very vocal advocate.
I've met Bill before and spoken to him. Yeah.
And me and my wife both wholeheartedly agree that this just cannot happen again to somebody else. In more vulgar terms, but this shit can't happen anymore. It just can't. And Cole was freaking 22 years old and had a life ahead of him. And, the biggest thing we always think about, breathing isn't optional. And they made it an option for Cole. And he had to choose one that, took him where he's at.
When you think about the human stakes of this, obviously it's easy to be angry. It's also easy to just feel overwhelmed by the scale and magnitude of the problem. These are some of the biggest companies in the world. You are actually in the fight here against them. Can you explain what you're doing and whether you think this is actually tractable or whether it's one of those problems where sort of around the edges you can make a difference, but fundamentally it's going to take sort of mass backlash and congressional action to move the needle?
It's horrific. And I asked Dr. Conway yesterday specifically about Cole. I said, how did this happen? Why was he denied? Why didn't you give him the benefit of the doubt? And then if you thought it was fraud, deal with it after the fact. And he wouldn't refuse. He wouldn't directly answer the question. We're looking into it legally to see what's happening and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And this was after he pointed to somebody in the audience who said they were his legal general counsel who was there to support him. Which I've never seen happen ever before.
I want to thank my lawyer for being here today. I'm going to need him.
Exactly what he said. I was like,
he didn't just need a publicist in the audience. He needed legal counsel on site there.
Yeah. And it's heartbreaking what happened to Cole, but I get emails and letters all the time where, somebody says, in one case, I was looking at $900 for my muscular dystrophy or multiple sclerosis. That's what it was, medicine. And I couldn't afford it. And I don't have long to go anyways. So rather than putting the burden on my wife after I passed by using credit cards, I was just not going to take my medication and just let it happen. And then I found cost plus drugs. And I went to Cost Plus Drugs because somebody recommended, looked it up, and instead of it being $900, I forget the exact amount, but it was like $40. And it was like $40 we could afford. You allowed me to spend more time with my family. I had another friend of mine who called and said, look, I'm taking this drug, droxidopa. I went to the local pharmacy. I just lost my insurance. They said it was going to be $10,000 a quarter. Can you get it for me? I looked it up. This was right when we got it. It was $73 a month, so $219 a quarter. With now it's less than $100 a quarter, right? And the point of all of this is, particularly for generics and those brands that will work with us, what costplusdrugs.com does differently, when you go to costplusdrugs.com and put in the name of the medication, if it's one of the thousands of SKUs that we carry, when it comes up, we show you our actual cost. This is exactly what we pay for. We show you our markup, which is always 15%. And by showing our cost, and as our volumes grow, our cost goes down and then our price goes down, we show you we're being fair. Because the missing ingredient, and you guys are going right to the heart of it, is that nobody trusts the economic side of healthcare at all.
Because there's no transparency, and because it's intentionally hidden from them.
Opacity is their best friend, and that's what Cost Plus Drugs solves.
I will say, I see the Kawhi Leonard question differently from you, but I revere your work on Cost Plus Drugs, because my view on it is that this is all intentionally complicated. So if you're listening to this podcast and your eyes are glazing over, that is the point. And part of why we wanted to tell this story and to talk about this and to ultimately have Caroline explain it is because this is intentionally complicated. What we are dealing with here is middlemen who have created middlemen. And that is very difficult for someone who's showing up and trying to buy an inhaler or get their medicine to understand. They don't know who's fucking them over. And if you don't know who's fucking you over, you can't fight back. And so, Mark, how have you been trying to break through the noise? I know when you introduce yourself in places, you don't introduce yourself as the Mavericks owner or as the Shark Tank judge. You introduce yourself as the founder of costplusdrugs.com.
Yep.
But can you explain, and the Mavericks owner, by the way, who didn't trade Luka, everybody.
Correct.
That was not Mark. He didn't do that. Luka was traded afterwards. But Mark, could you explain sort of like how you get people to give a shit about this?
You just let people know, right? It's really for a couple things there. So first, from a patient's perspective, we don't spend any money on advertising. The whole mission is when you can buy your medication at costplusdrugs.com for $34 and one of the pharmacy or PBMs set the price at $200, $300, $500, $1,000, you're going to tell everybody else with the same illness or malady, hey, go buy it from Cost Plus. You might be in the cancer ward talking about it, which happens all the time. You'll tell your doctor, you'll tell your nurses, and they'll tell their patients. And that's how we've grown to help millions of people in less than 4 years. And so that's part one of what I do, going out there and communicating so that patients will communicate to each other. And by not spending money on marketing and advertising, we can keep our margins at 15%. And by passing through any volume discounts we get as we grow, our costs actually go down over time as opposed to go up. So that's part one. Part two is the insurance plans and the PBMs that they use are signed off by CEOs of companies. And so, as a CEO of a lot of different companies, an investor in a lot of different companies over the years, I understand it's not a CEO's core competency to understand all their health benefits or in particular their pharmacy benefits. You're using a consultant or a broker, or you have an HR person, and that HR person is spending all their time dealing with employees who are dealing with prior authorization issues, step-up issues, other issues, right? Can't afford their deductible issues, all these things that just consume their time, and that they don't want to have to go to the CEO or the VP in charge of these things and explain to them, this is not a good program. Or explain to them, why are you taking these rebates when in turn it's just causing our sickest employees or their families to be charged more? So what I do is I go right to the CEO. And I sit in CEO meetings, group meetings, when they all get together and do the secret CEO handshake at whatever event it is. I'm like, how many people here are happy with the cost of healthcare? Nobody raised their hands. How many people here think the system's working right? Nobody raises their hands. How many of you realize that you are the ones that are responsible for this problem? And then they kind of lean back. You are the ones that put your pen to paper, right? You sign on the line that is dotted for these healthcare benefits, or you approve them. And so you are directly responsible for the cost of care that's going up. You are signing the contracts that are increasing the cost of care. Let me tell you what you need to do to change that. So I went to one company, I'll give you an example. And this company has 10,000 employees and 1,500 members, because all the families of all the employees. And I said, thing I just want you to try, because I guarantee you're getting ripped off. I won't name the PBM, but I told him it was one of the big three, guaranteed you're getting ripped off. And I said, the first thing to do is say, okay, can we add cost plus drugs to our network? Because I gave them examples of biosimilars. And by adding cost plus drugs to the network, then any of their members would be able to use us. And where we were cheaper than their deductible, cheaper than what they would pay through the PBM, they would save money. So they went and checked and they were like, oh yeah, they told us you can be part of it. They have this true cost program. I'm like, we don't have a deal with that PBM. They told you that we were part of their network, but we're not part of their network. They lied.
So Mark, these are kind of mob-like organizations. What have they done to you? Have they tried to fuck with you, intimidate you?
Oh yeah, for sure. Not directly. Indirectly, they do what hurts us the most and hurts patients the most. They go to the brand manufacturers and they know that if the brand manufacturers allow cost plus drugs to sell their brands at cost plus 15%, we're going to undercut all the pricing that patients, particularly during their deductible phase. And when the CEOs or VPs or HR heads start comparing the prices they do get to our prices, they're going to realize they're paying far too much. And then in turn, they're going to start getting RFPs from those transparent PBMs that don't play those same games. And so the only way they can contain us or protect themselves from us is by threatening the big branded pharma manufacturers by saying, if you work with your brands with cost plus drugs, not all of them, even one of them.
Wow.
Then we are going to take your entire portfolio of drugs and we're going to change the tier for it on our formulary. So if you think about your own healthcare, you have different tiers, like generics may be free or $10 copay. And then they have these things called specialty tiers. And the specialty tiers, you have to pay a lot more or co-insurance, right? Well, particularly for specialty generics, our prices are a fraction of theirs. Right. And what they tell the big brand manufacturers is, we're going to move you from tier 1 to say tier 5. And that could end up costing that brand tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year or more. And the CEOs tell me, Mark, I love you and we'll figure out ways eventually to work together, but we can't do it now. And
Laura,
literally, Sam,
that sounds like an antitrust problem. No?
Oh, for sure. That's why when Laura came on, I'm like, let's go, right? This is like right up. Sammy, you're going to die. They asked me to do an interview of the head of a pharmacy, a brand name pharmacy manufacturer. And I said to them, I know you can't answer this question out loud, but if you would like to work with cost plus drugs, but the big PBMs are preventing you, shake your head and smile twice.
I mean, but
and he
but
said,
in all
no,
seriousness,
Mark, that would never,
In all seriousness, Mark, it sounds like this is an antitrust violation. Laura,
oh,
100%.
100%. Like Laura went back and mentioned what Lena Khan was doing to go after the PBMs during the last administration. They were using our price list. That's how they determined they were being mispriced and abused by using, because we still, almost less than 4 years in, we are still the only pharmacy that publishes a full price list.
Wow.
Nobody else does. If you want a list of all the drugs that any other pharmacy carries, and I said this to Dr. Conway from OptumRx yesterday, and he said, well, we've checked and our prices are all cheaper than yours. And I'm like, great, you're much bigger than us. Why don't you publish that price list and prove it? Why is it more why is it more expensive for people during their deductible phase to buy from you than it is for us? Why won't you go to United Healthcare and say, hey, if someone buys from Cost Plus because it's cheaper, it's okay, and we'll allow you to apply it to your deductible? Hell no, they're not going to do any of those things. They're doing all they can to keep us on the outside looking in.
I will say, I think a side effect, or maybe part of the plan, but not the ultimate goal of Cost Plus drugs and your transparency, is that it does make reporting on this. It really facilitates that because we can have a reference price to compare to. It's also facilitated, I'm sure to a bunch of like academic research where they will take the commercial claims and compare it using yours as the reference. So that transparency has been huge, I think, in understanding this issue as well. And I just wanted to say too, Mark, you talked about that retaliation and not being able to say it. Fear of retaliation is a significant reason why a lot of people we spoke to in reporting this story were hesitant to go on the record or use their names, or things like that. Like there's a lot of people we spoke to that we, were anonymous because they mentioned exactly that. Fear of retaliation.
This is all driven by vengeance and by fear and by intimidation. And it's also driven by obfuscation, as we're talking about, by trying to make this very hard to understand. And so now I want to pivot to Caroline. Can you try to digest and explain what Mark and Laura and I have been talking about? Caroline, just to start, you have no experience studying the healthcare system, correct?
Sammy, I'm going to make a viral confession on this podcast. I don't even have health insurance. I've never had health insurance. If I break my arm tomorrow, I'm totally fucking fucked. Like, I'm just going to have to hope the bones mend themselves.
50% of the time, if you just pay cash, it's going to be cheaper than what your insurance company negotiated.
And to be clear, Caroline, just to make that very concrete, there's all these people in all these offices making billions and billions of dollars to negotiate on your behalf to get a better price. And that whole system still results in you paying more because there's so many people to pay off. There's bouncers the whole way down. You got to give the 100 to the PBM. You got to give the 100 to the insurer.
And the administrator. Somebody's got to track all that stuff because they don't want to be in trouble with the IRS, right? So somebody's got to track. And so the administrative costs that are introduced and the extraneous costs that are introduced make it cheaper. I literally changed how my companies do healthcare by creating direct contracts with all these providers so we would get the cash price. And literally, Caroline, hopefully 40% of America doesn't have $400 in the bank for an emergency. But if you have enough money in the bank or access to it, it's cheaper to get a cash price for almost everything.
Now, you should still get health insurance, Caroline, as your friend. I think you should get health insurance, but...
Mark, you're solving all of my problems.
No, we're not saying that you shouldn't.
No, I'm going to ask for cash price, and I'm going to go to Cost Plus drugs.
Amen.
Caroline, we can circle up after, and I'll talk to you about direct primary care and catastrophic coverage arrangements you can consider.
Caroline, please explain PBMs and PBM GPOs and what's going on here.
Okay, PBM stands for Pharmaceutical Benefit Mafia. Just kidding. I know it's manager, but I really think Pharmaceutical Benefit Mafia should be like a hashtag on this podcast. Okay. They are supposed to aggregate demand for customers and employers and negotiate the lowest price. Instead, they are basically auctioning off access to something called a formulary. What's a formulary? Unclear, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the formulas of the medications. I guess we'll never know.
It's the list of drugs that are available
that your insurance covers. That you often have like tiers.
It's like a drug menu.
Yes, exactly. And kind of sorted by price, where you can get it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the tier 1's kind of like the Happy Meal. It's inexpensive. Mm-hmm. And then the tier 5 or tier 6 is
caviar.
You can't afford it. If you have to look at the price, you shouldn't be there.
The formulary is the club. That's the club. The PBM is saying you can only get into the formulary, the club, if you pay us some amount of money. And because we're covering so many people and we're so big, we can get you a better price. Exactly.
Okay, so there was scrutiny about these rebates. And so instead of actually doing any sort of reform. They just restructured into these subsidiaries outside the US so that they could retain a bunch of money from the rebates and just call it fees. And people like me who truly have just zero knowledge of the healthcare industry, part of me is sad that I have to be here, as like, if I can understand it, anyone can. But part of me is so emotionally invested in this problem and the fact that people are dying. I am glad that I can be here as like the most basic common denominator. Like, if I can get this, truly anyone can. And they are just confusing people with their fees. And as Mark said, I thought this was really poignant. Opacity is their best friend. Like, I truly I didn't understand. I went into this knowing nothing about this. I didn't know the vocab. I didn't even really understand like the difference between a deductible and a copay. But I do understand that through obfuscation of fees, three companies have 150 employees each, are making $10 billion, and no one employee is taking home 50 mil each.
To be clear, 150 between all three companies.
No, I thought each one had 150.
No,
there's no way 150 between all three, Ascent, Zinc, and
Correct.
MSR.
Because for two of them, it's infinite, right? Because they had no employees.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, we were able to speak to a couple people who have worked there over the years. It's not zero, but it's like empty offices for sure. Even when you look in the offices, it's like 10 plausible desks, you know? It's like not like there can possibly be that many people. But Caroline, I guess what would be your tip, Caroline? As someone who's been able to, for better or worse, go very viral very many times across the internet and become a main character, how do we make PBMs and PBM GPOs a main character that people care about and try to get accountability from?
Yes, something that's really interesting to me about you, Mark, is these guys know you from your corporate, financial, professional investing side. And what my role in the podcast is, and the expertise I bring, is that I know a lot about the internet, and I am very familiar with viral moments. And I know you not from any companies. I know you from your role as like the people's billionaire. I know your viral clips about the way you're raising your kids and how so many people admire like the financial literacy and the no nonsense approach to like, this is my money. Don't grow up entitled. Yeah, I think actually Mark would be a good person to speak on this too, because you actually bridge these worlds. Like, you understand virality and you understand how to be a main character, but you also understand companies in a way that I don't naturally do, in a way that I really have to stretch my brain to understand. I think the biggest way to make people care is, first step is exactly what we're doing, because no one will care if they don't understand it. These fees are so nebulous, so like, and we already pay so many little fees that we don't understand for like, we even have subscriptions to things we're not using. It's like, it's almost, we're so preconditioned to like accept these fees unquestioningly. And so I think just explaining it is step one, but I would be open to more input from you, Mark, because I think this is like above my pay grade. I'm honestly intimidated by the fact that the health insurance companies own these PBMs. Like that's the biggest problem of all. How do we even dismantle this? I don't fucking know, to be honest.
You got to break them up. You got to break them up. You have to. And I'm a hardcore capitalist, but it has gotten so bad and they have gotten so polluted in so many ways that the healthcare market is no longer a market.
What ties together Mark Cuban, Caroline Calloway, and Lena Khan? They all want to break up the insurance companies that own PBMs.
I think they need I think we need to focus on how they are using mob tactics on the government, because I think just looking at this historically, it's the only thing that's ever worked. Like, they can scam the American people, but they can't scam America. This seems to be the only way forward.
You think that it's the getting Al Capone for tax evasion? We got to get the PBMs.
We got to find an angle.
Government. All right, that's interesting. That's a good idea, Caroline.
Yeah, the FTC probe and House Oversight Committee one they both have probes out into these guys, but nothing. That's part of it too. Is there's not much. You talk about how do we get people to find out about this? Hopefully, this article helps with that because there is not much information out there, like in official records, in the public domain.
You don't get to be a multi-$100 billion in revenue company without doing some smart things and doing some underhanded things. And, particularly for all of them, it's all about the stock price going up. So because it's about stock price first, you don't get alignment with all the stakeholders, right? And when I mean stakeholders, not necessarily from a financial perspective, but employers who are trying to save money while offering care for their employees and their families. It's getting so expensive for them, they're running out of options. It costs $29,000 for a company to insure a family of 5. That's a lot of money, which also means that those prices have to go up from those companies. Their employees get paid less because for that's just one employee who has a family of 5. If you took that $30,000 almost and were able to make it available to your employers or lower cost services or products, the entire country changes. And then it becomes a question of, well, where can we change things in the healthcare industry or just healthcare in general in the United States of America? One of the natural responses is, well, in 32 of the 33, Western countries, they use universal healthcare. Personally, I don't think we can go to universal healthcare yet because for a couple reasons, most of those countries switched over decades, if not centuries ago. They started before all the big technology hit, before there were even MRI machines and that type of thing. The second part is somebody has to be in charge of that universal healthcare in the United States. And the way Bernie and Congressperson Jayapal wrote the Medicare for All and other alternatives have been written, it always starts off with, this shall be run effectively by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now, who is our Secretary of Health and Human Services right now?
Isn't that RFK?
RFK.
No.
Right. Now, some people may think that's a great thing. Other people may think otherwise. But the point being, there's going to be a political influence on how that universal healthcare system is run. And that is an uniquely American problem that makes it very difficult for us to go to universal healthcare. What I see personally, healthcare, the economic side of healthcare is very easy. It's what does it cost? Who pays for it, and who pays for the things people can't afford, right? So when Caroline doesn't have insurance, if she can afford the care she needs, great. Nothing else matters. It's all taken care of. If Caroline can't afford it, well, we allow her to go to the emergency room until she gets stabilized. But at some point, either the taxpayer is the payer of last resort, or we have to create programs that formalize that so that we can help those people who can't afford to pay for their own care. That's the missing link. And right now we're fighting over all this mishigas, all this stuff related to the ACA and should we have premium tax credits and should we give HSAs people money? No. The ACA is broken, not because it was designed incorrectly, but because it never was fully implemented as designed. Right. And where we've gotten to now is, again, these big insurance companies are smart. And so they figured out how to game and arbitrage the system inside the ACA and the outside by making all these acquisitions and becoming vertically integrated, by acquiring PBMs, by moving part of the revenue source to the PBM and then to the rebate GPO, by buying up providers, all these different doctors, right? When I talked to the head of Optima RX yesterday, I brought up the fact that they underpay independent physicians and they control, more than 10% of the physicians. He goes, oh no, that's a misnomer. That's not correct. We don't employ that many. We only employ 2% of doctors. The other 8% are contractors.
Sure,
I'm like,
sure.
that's a
Sure.
distinction
Still
without
counts.
a difference. Yeah, but they're still reporting to you. That's like saying I'm only, I work for Uber and Lyft, right? You still got to do what Uber says. But the big picture here is every one of us have got to bring up the question and go to our bosses, go to anybody who signs on an insurance plan, whether it's you or anybody else, and make sure that everything is understood. Because it's that information asymmetry that makes the whole thing fall apart. And the only way we're going to get to a point where we have complete transparency, because once we have complete transparency, then states, as an example, can start to make their minds up to say, we can afford to pay for all the health care of everybody in our state because we've looked at all the claims, understand what our costs are going to be. You can't do that until there's transparency. And so by pushing for transparency, by making sure your company works with pass-through PBMs or doesn't fall prey to all these scams, we can start making headway. By going to your representative and saying, it's not about whether the ACA is good or bad, it's we don't know what it costs anyways. And so it doesn't matter. Because I'll end with this. If you have insurance, that's great. But if you can't afford your deductible, you don't have insurance. And that's the missing link that CEOs don't understand, that people buying insurance don't understand. It's just a mess right now. And we need to get away from the middlemen, whether it's the insurance companies, because for most of the biggest insurance companies, I've seen numbers, and Laura, you may have specific data, that like 70+% of their revenue comes from the government on the insurance side of their business. It's just insane the way the whole thing is run, and it gets complicated and circular in a lot of respects, and hard to pull these pieces together. But just realize that the decision makers are your legislators in Congress and at the state level, and the people who make decisions at the employer level. Go to your boss, whether you have 5 people in your company or 500,000 or 1 million people in the company, and say, why are we doing business with these people? And the one question to ask, if you have a deductible, which almost everybody does, and you have to pay for something in that deductible phase, ask HR, ask your boss, why am I paying full retail price if these big insurance companies are supposed to be negotiating, if these big PBMs are supposed to be negotiating on my behalf? And why are you...
Mark, Laura's gonna come to me with some serious questions about our healthcare plan at Hunterbrook.
You should,
that's
right?
correct.
Let me
That's
help
correct.
you. Let me help you. I will help you find better options than what you're doing. Because you see, Sammy, how expensive it is. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And Mark, we're so grateful for your time and your advocacy on this. And where we end our podcasts usually, and we'll do it today, is Caroline ranks the scam 0 to 10. PBM GPOs, Caroline, where would you rank them next to Anna Delvey, Sam Bankman-Fried? Where would you put PBM GPOs?
Honestly, this is one of the worst scams we've ever covered, because I think the amount of Americans that it's affecting is all of them. And it's very rare that we see a scam. So many industries are like specialized. Last time we talked about a sausage factory, and I guess technically that wouldn't affect vegetarians or vegans, but like this
Sure.
affects literally every American.
Everybody.
I would say literally 11 out of 10. We've broken the
We've
scale.
never gotten an 11. We've
No,
never
this
gotten
is
an 11
really-
before.
We've never even gotten a 10. Like, this is really, really, really bad. And you know what honestly frightens me is thinking about what Mark was calling this like information asymmetry, which I just think is like such poetry, is that like trying to combat that, this podcast is actually the first step. Like, it's very thinking about zooming out and surveying the landscape of the internet. There are actually very few things out there that will be talking about PBMs, and it's sad that we're the first, but it's also great to be one of the part of
Well,
the
yeah,
first.
we're far from the first, but hopefully this will reach a
Really?
whole new number of people. So
I've never
yeah,
seen
sure.
anything on the internet about this. I've never seen
Mark's been talking about
anything.
this for years. But yes, this story will blow people's minds. I think the empty headquarters are crazy making billions of dollars.
And Sammy,
So
what
thank
I'm gonna do, I'm gonna send you a section from the PBM contract. Right. And if it wasn't so long, I'd be like, let me read it as fast as I can. And then you could speed it up. You know how at the end of all the drug commercials, they do all that stuff, right? Yeah, exactly. Because it is horrific. Here, I'm going to give you one little taste. PBM contracts with manufacturers and or group purchasing organizations for its own account to obtain formulary rebates attributable to the utilization of certain drugs and supplies. Formulary rebate amounts received vary based on client-specific utilization, the volume of utilization, as well as formulary position applicable to the drugs or supplies, and adheres to various formulary management controls, benefit design requirements, claims volume, and other similar factors. And in certain instances, also may vary based on the product's market share. PBM pays formulary rebates it receives to a client based on the PBM client agreement terms and may realize positive margin. In addition, PBM provides administrative services to contracted manufacturers, which include, for example, maintenance and operation of systems and other infrastructure necessary for invoicing and processing rebates, pharmacy discount programs, access to drug utilization data as allowed by law for purposes of verifying and evaluating applicable payments and for other purposes related to the manufacturer's products. PBM receives administrative fees directly from participating manufacturers and indirectly from GPOs in its capacity as a PBM company. And it goes on.
Yeah, we've been looking at these contracts, and Mark, we'll talk offline about what I think is the legal vulnerability of these companies, but it's absolutely fascinating and enraging. And I'm so grateful for your time and yours, Caroline. And we will see all of you next time on The Hunt.